Phil, we've been dancing around a question for our entire show today about this war in Ukraine. I think you've got a good question to sort of tie all these things together.
Well, we've been talking about on-ramps and off-ramps, Russian expansion, NATO expansion. There's so many things happening. The Ukrainians as underdogs. But at the end of the day, maybe the most vital question is, what constitutes victory?
That's a great question. And I would argue that none of the parties has really come to grips with reconciling their absolute version of victory with the long-term nature of the problem that's before us. So if you look at Ukraine, they want Russia out of Ukraine, as they defined it, including Crimea. Russia obviously lays claim to Crimea and points to a referendum there, and looks to obviously lay claim to parts of eastern Ukraine. The United States increasingly has begun to even talk about, basically, watching and encouraging the weakening of the Russian military such that they can't mount any kind of offensive incursion in the future. And so these are not reconcilable. They're absolute. But the nature of conflict, like I mentioned to you before, is really ongoing. And at some point, the parties are going to have more of a relative understanding of what victory is. How much territorial integrity is Ukraine willing to accept? How much of the costs of securing territory and bolstering these manufactured historical claims is what Russia willing to promote? How much of the weakening of Russia is the United States and NATO willing to accept in return for stable situation on the ground in Ukraine and trying to redress the 30-year problem of a Euro-Atlantic security architecture, where Russia, no matter who's in the Kremlin, is going to have a stake in that situation. So it strikes me that understanding what victory is right now is the problem. The actors do not have a clear, or at least have not articulated clear understandings of what a relative victory would mean in an ongoing, competitive, but stable relationship that they're going to need to forge. Now, there are reasons why the United States may not want to get out in front of Ukraine when it comes to the security issues within Ukraine. But the United States does have concerns and security concerns that are outside of Ukraine, which have to do with the Euro-Atlantic security architecture. And up to now, it seems like we've been primarily focused on what victory means within Ukraine, as opposed to what victory may mean in this broader architecture. And it strikes me that now, as the tide of battle, or we seem to be, gravitating towards more of a more protracted conflict, that the United States needs to begin to think about that architecture and how we can help shape the incentives for those other parties who may have, for very obvious reasons, absolute interests at this point, to see a relative opportunity for victory in participating in some kind of Euro-Atlantic strategic architecture that satisfies at least a modicum of stability in Ukraine and ties it to that broader equation. And that's where it strikes me the role of the United States would be, but it requires having much more concerted understanding of what victory means outside of Ukraine, the battles taking